I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 20th, 2026. Today on our Theology Roundup, we are continuing a series we started last Monday on one law or one Torah theology. Now, yesterday, we did go rather long on our news roundup, something I expected, which was only going to take 10 minutes, took a lot longer, but I hope that you all got a lot of useful information and perspectives from it. Fast forwarding to next week, we will probably be able to conclude this study on Friday. So today and then 5 more sessions. This is a very important topic, of course, for many people. The issue of one law or one Torah theology is a major dividing line across the Messianic sphere of influence. While it's pretty clear by now that I am not too favorable to those who stridently hold to one law or one Torah theology. I think they have misapplied the different Pentateuchal passages which speak of one law or one statute. That is restrictive instruction, not universal instruction. Even more so, and we're going to be getting into this a lot next week, I've got some problems with their spirituality. With that said, native and sojourner in ancient Israel had far more in common than not, and likewise, simply because one is negatively inclined to one Torah theology does not mean that they are negative to non-Jewish believers embracing things like Shabbat or the festivals or the kosher-style diet, etc., as a matter of their growth in holiness. And so we're going to be getting to that specifically next week. But yeah, we are in the year 2026 now. We are at a time when a lot of changes are occurring. We're in the mid to late 2020s. And, there are a lot of issues which are 100 to 1,000 times more important than this, which we're going to definitely be challenged by. So part of me discussing this issue now is to just kind of get it out of the way, because we're going to be getting into some things, certainly in the news, which in the news roundup segment, which are challenging to say the least. All right, so please turn with me to the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net. By now, you should be able to know where this is. Scroll down, click on articles, and scroll down to the letter O. Where here you will see the article, Approaching One Law Controversies, Sorting Through the Legalism, listed. You can click there and a PDF file will open up. And this is where we left off yesterday with ger and proselytos, who should be submitted to Moses's teaching. Now, before we get started into this, I said yesterday we would be talking about both ger and proselytos. After not only after how long yesterday went, we're only going to address the ger part today. We'll address proselytos Monday. I also have an appointment I've got to meet later this afternoon, so I've got to shorten this up a little bit. So we're just going to address the ger part because of that. And I know that a lot of people who follow Messianic Insider, they don't watch or listen to it live. They catch up with either watching the archived episode or they'll listen to it audio podcast. So shorter episode today will help people get caught up, especially with the weekend coming. Okay. Ger and proselytos, who should be submitted to Moses's teaching. And so today we're only going to be reviewing the ger part. In the discussion regarding the relationship of the ger or sojourner within ancient Israel to Moses's teaching, it is witnessed in various Jewish theological sources that the ger was not so much a sojourner or alien, an outsider welcomed into ancient Israel, but instead was a proselyte. The Orthodox Jewish Art Scroll Tanakh, some of you will probably have that in your library, most notably renders the Hebrew ger as proselyte in Exodus 12:48, Leviticus 24:22, Numbers 15:15, 29, and as convert in Numbers 9:14. Does ger really mean proselyte? It can be concluded as though the Torah only has significant application for the native born of Israel and those who have gone through some sort of formal proselyte conversion procedure. Is it proper to look at the Hebrew term ger as a formal proselyte convert? And what is communicated in those places where the Hebrew ger was translated in the Greek Septuagint as proselytos? Now, I mentioned this yesterday, and I'm going to mention this again. It is true, whether it is biblical Hebrew, biblical Greek, other languages, certainly even the modern English language. We don't even have to go all the way back to the Elizabethan period with the King James Version, and then what certain terms in the King James Version might mean today in a modern English, whether that's a British or American context. We know that just over the past 50 to 60 years, in the English language, a term like, I'm sorry to mention this one, but it's just so relevant. A term like gay meant one thing 50 or 60 years ago. It meant happy. And of course, today now means gay now means you're homosexual. So seeing how terms in the English language just over a 50 to 60 year period can change from meaning this to meaning that, it's not difficult to recognize how there would be likewise some variance possibly in biblical Hebrew or biblical Greek. This applies more to the term proselytos, which we'll be getting into on Monday. But just keep that in mind. All right. What we must immediately pause and note, especially in weighing what is intended by the Pentateuch, employing the term ger. Okay, and somebody sooner or later is going to say, John, what do you mean by the term Pentateuch? You've mentioned the term Pentateuch a few times. Okay, anybody who's been studying the Holy Scriptures their whole lives in an evangelical Protestant context knows what the Pentateuch is. The Messianic community tends to not use the term Pentateuch, but Pentateuch as a term just means book of five. And in biblical studies, it's usually used to describe the first five books of Moses, the Pentateuch. And it's derived from Greek, and it's used often, but not exclusively, in Septuagint studies. The Messianic community tends to use the term Torah. I will use the term Moses' teaching. Of course, we're all familiar with the term law of Moses, but because, of course, well, what does one law mean? One statute mean? Is it speaking of, one law, lowercase l, speaking of a specific instruction or direction, or is it speaking of law, uppercase L, the Torah of Moses, the first five books, the Chumash, i.e. the Pentateuch? That's why we employ the term Pentateuch a little more frequently in this kind of an examination. The term Pentateuch is not something to fear. What we must immediately pause and note, especially in weighing what is intended by the Pentateuch, employing the term ger, is how in biblical studies and in modern day Judaism, the English word proselyte can have different connotations. In biblical studies, using the term proselyte can have a general meaning more consistent with what Webster's New World Dictionary and Thesaurus defines as one who has been converted from one religion, sect, etc., to another. with many of the details left either open-ended or undefined. Excuse me. Judaism and Christianity and other religions all have proselytes in this sense. When a theologian like Walter C. Kaiser comments on Leviticus 24, 10 through 23, and speaks of how, quote, the blasphemer's father was a proselyte, unquote, he is largely concerned with someone who has committed himself to following Israel's God. But, as the Pocket Dictionary of Biblical Studies indicates, quote, later rabbinic material describes a conversion process that requires study of the law, circumcision for males, baptism by immersion, and sacrifice, unquote, which is definitely what the Art Scroll Tanakh and various other Jewish works have more in mind in translating ger as proselyte. Although such a process was present in Second Temple Judaism, is this what was originally intended or implied by the term ger? So we're going to, this is going to be shorter than what we will be getting into next time. The ger. All right. RJD Nauf provides the following summary of the Hebrew noun ger. Its root, gimel vav resh, and related Semitic terms from the Dictionary of the Old Testament Pentateuch. Quote, ger is a noun deriving from the Hebrew root, gimel vav resh, to sojourn, tarry as a sojourner, with likely cognates in Arabic, neighbor, patron, protector, Ethiopic, neighbor, Ugaritic, dweller, question mark, and Aramaic, client. Later Christian Palestinian usage associates it with proselytes or neighbors, and in some cases with adultery. A connection with the Akkadian geru, to be hostile, and its participial form, garu, enemy, is also possible, arguably tying in with Hebrew roots gimel vav resh, equaling gimel resh hey, to attack, strive, and gimel vav resh, equaling yod gimel resh, to be afraid. The root is also attested in Phoenician personal names, where it would seem to denote dependence or client status in relation to a deity, as in client/protege of deity. In a Moabite inscription, the Mesha Stela, it appears to designate a distinct people group, male and female, within Israel, unquote. And that is from the Dictionary of the Old Testament Pentateuch. So what we're trying to get at today, what did ger mean for those specific passages which describe one law that's lowercase l law, meaning a specific direction, or one statute for the native and sojourner in ancient Israel? Does it mean someone who entered in to the community of ancient Israel, or, as many Jewish examiners have concluded, does it mean some kind of a formal proselyte to Judaism, some kind of a formal convert, as it were? Okay. The ger in the Torah was largely someone who traveled alongside of the ancient Israelites in the wilderness, and other than a difference of ethnicity, was to be treated basically the same as any native born of Israel. Such gerim were anticipated to join the population of Israel once the promised land had been subdued and settled. Now details how, quote, the ger refers generally to a person not native to the local area, and thus usually without family ties or landed property, unquote. And once again, that's from the Dictionary of the Old Testament Pentateuch, which is a resource your congregation definitely should have in its library. The legal status of a ger was much closer to that of a native Israelite than not, and for the 15th or 13th century BCE, would have been a feature of Israel's law, that's capital L law, which stood in contrast to other contemporary codes. However, it is seen how the ancient ger was given a few allowances, which native-born Israelites did not have. Among these are included how the ger could face permanent slavery as inherited property. Leviticus 25, 39 to 43, 46, 54 to 55, unlike the native, and how a ger could be allowed to eat an animal which died of natural causes. Deuteronomy 14:21. In Knauth's estimation, at least in some targeted places, quote, the alien was clearly treated differently as a second-class citizen, unquote. Both of these examples might be more easily understood, not in terms of two tiers of citizenship somehow depicted in the Torah, but rather how most sojourners within ancient Israel were often very poor people in need of considerable aid, who would probably have not had large extended families. Unlike native Israelites, most often had to help them. Excuse me, like native Israelites who most often had. Anyway, I may have to correct that. Grammatically speaking, I tell people that I will leave some grammatical things in our books and our resources so people know we don't use AI. Uh, this is a good example. Who probably have not had large extended family. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yes, this should say, but rather how most sojourners within ancient Israel were often very poor people in need of considerable aid, who would probably not have had large extended families, unlike native Israelites, who most often had them to help them. Okay, I'm sorry about that. And perhaps the provision allotted to sojourners would be a feature which attracted many into Israel. Okay, let me comment on this very briefly. The sojourners in the community of ancient Israel were a protected class of people. And why is that? Being permitted to eat an animal that died of natural causes, being permitted to glean from the fields, among others, being told you need to be welcoming, you need to treat these people the same as you would treat yourself, basically. Often because they were a poor and vulnerable class, no different than widows or orphans. And sometimes that does not get the traction it should in the debate over one law, one Torah theology. Well, the native and sojourner were very, very different. Okay, I agree that native and sojourner were not 100% the same because, I mean, by virtue of the fact of a sojourner entering into the community and not being raised in the society of Israel from birth, there are going to be differences, right? At the same time, the fact that a sojourner would enter into Israel, the community of ancient Israel, and be given a few allowances, and there'd be some differences, how much of that is reflected of the ancient sojourners' common economic status as generally poor, perhaps even destitute. How many sojourners entered into the community of ancient Israel because, hey, I can glean the fields. Maybe I can't do that in this other society over here. I'd be accused of stealing. That's something which doesn't get enough traction in this debate. All right. I'm sorry about some of this things that's going to have to be fixed. The possibility of being a perpetual slave in the house of a master with his provision, as unpleasant as we might think it is in the 21st century, could have been better than being almost completely without. Being shown a bit of kindness by being allowed to eat an animal which died of natural causes, in many cases likely due to an accidental death, as stomach wrenching as it may be, was surely better than starving to death. Excuse me. Jacob Milgram describes the most likely economic reality. Quote, Although some Gerim did manage to amass wealth, Leviticus 25:37, most were poor and were bracketed with the poor as recipients of welfare. Leviticus 19:10, 23:22, 25:6, unquote. And indeed, that explains a lot regarding some of the differences which do exist in the Torah between the native and sojourner and ancient Israel. The common economic status of the sojourner as being relatively destitute. All right, let's get back now. No Bible reader can easily overlook how the Torah was most concerned with the ger, along with the needy or destitute. Nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger, ger. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19:10, New American Standard. When you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor gather the gleaning of your harvest. You are to leave them for the needy and the alien, ger. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 23:22, New American Standard. And then finally, he executes justice for the orphan and the widow and shows his love for the alien, ger, by giving him food and clothing. Deuteronomy 10:18, New American Standard. If there were exceptions for the ger, in terms of you shall not eat anything which dies of itself, you may give it to the alien who is in your town so that he may eat it. Deuteronomy 14:21, New American Standard. Then these are to be understood principally in terms of the relatively common low economic status of the sojourner in the community of ancient Israel. And indeed, how many people in this debate, are you one law or not? And well, I'm obviously not. Um, but how many of them, in wanting to point out differences and distinctions, and they tend to go overboard with that, fail to factor in that the sojourners in ancient Israel were a vulnerable class of people, often very poor, perhaps even borderline destitute. That doesn't get the attention it should. And indeed, a huge part of that is because too many people, and I said this at the beginning of our study, and this makes this whole examination really difficult. They are reading this instruction as though it is written directly to them living in the 21st century when it was not. This instruction mainly concerned ancient Israel in the ancient Near East. And there, in the community of ancient Israel, there was the Ezrach native and the ger or sojourner. Okay, we'll be getting into later on next week some of the more modern issues as it involves this. Excuse me. All right. Now it considers the ger to be among, quote, particularly vulnerable groups in Israelite society, and is thus afforded a number of special protections in Pentateuchal law, unquote. Dictionary of the Old Testament Pentateuch. Also, not to be overlooked is how in Deuteronomy 14:21, the ger asher be shiarecha, or the alien who is within your gates, New King James, could be an anticipation of a Canaanite subject in Israel or Judah, the Kaler-Baumgartner lexicon, having been conquered and deserving of some mercy with being given an animal for eating. All right. The thrust of the Torah is that the ger was not only to be allowed into the community of Israel, but was to be treated, I'm so sorry, to be treated essentially as a native Israelite, although it is also quite true that the ger was not exactly the same. Okay. And that is really the main difference between myself and so many others and one law or one Torah theology. One law or one Torah theology tends to promote there was no difference of any kind between native and sojourner and ancient Israel. Those who advocate distinction theology will say that there were dozens of differences between native and sojourner in ancient Israel. I would come to the conclusion that there were some differences between native and sojourner in ancient Israel, but the focus of the biblical text is to focus on commonality first, not differences. And that's something which far too frequently gets lost. Okay. I'm sorry. In Deuteronomy 1:16, Moses admonished, "Hear the cases between your fellow countrymen and judge righteously between a man and his fellow countrymen, or the alien ger who is with him." New American Standard. All persons within the community of ancient Israel were to be instructed by the law. Deuteronomy 31:12. But while such fair and equal treatment was a major thrust of the Torah as originally given, the history of the Tanakh is often a testament to how, once established within the Promised Land, its instructions were not often remembered. The ger sojourner was originally counted within the broad community of Israel. Deuteronomy 29:10 through 13. Also Joshua 8:33. But as D.I. Block, yes, that's Daniel Block, observes, quote, second-class treatment of sojourners may be documented from later history. The Gerim, noted separately in David's census, 2 Chronicles 2:17, became the basis of Solomon's work crews, some of which consisted entirely of sojourners. 1 Chronicles 22:2, unquote, from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. All right, now, do want to apologize for some of the things I'm going to have to go back and fix, particularly as it involves, natives entering into, sojourners entering into ancient Israel. They wouldn't have the family mechanisms of economic support as, of course, natives would have had. There were some comments made regarding the terminology ger and whether or not per Jewish conclusions frequently drawn regarding the term ger, whether it means convert or not, whether it means proselyte or not. That is going to be something we get into next time in detail. And it specifically concerns how, in the Greek Septuagint, the term ger was frequently rendered as proselutos. Now, one of the big questions is, when you see the term ger in the Septuagint rendered as proselutos, does it mean a proselyte, someone who in rabbinical Judaism of the Second Temple period and certainly later would go through the formal circumcision, water immersion, and then offering a sacrifice? Or, and this is a little provocative, but it's definitely something we got to keep in mind, is the proselutos of the Septuagint, mind you, affected by earlier Greek uses of the term proselutos, which just means a sojourner. Okay. And that's why I brought out how in biblical Hebrew, biblical Greek, even witnessed in English, some terms appearing in one time period don't often mean the same as when they appear in another time period. And the best example I can bring up is how 50, 60 years ago, the term gay just meant happy. Well, today it means homosexual. So we have to evaluate whether the term proselutos in the Septuagint, which of course was earlier than more, post Maccabean crisis, Second Temple Judaism. The term proselutos in Greek earlier meant sojourner. Later, of course, we do recognize that by the late 2nd century BCE, 1st century BCE, and then 1st century CE, it meant a convert to Judaism. How should we best approach this? And that doesn't get the attention it, of course, should. So please keep in mind, I appreciate some of the questions, some of the feedback. We don't typically post these because your name and your graphic will appear, and I respect your privacy. Some people are not used to seeing their name listed, but this study is cumulative. We started last week, so we've had 10 sessions so far, and next week we're going to have 5 more sessions. So if you need to, please do go to the Messianic Apologetics website. I will show you exactly how to get to this. We'll go back to the top. MessianicApologetics.net. Click on articles. Scroll down, all articles listed in alphabetical order. Of course, go down to the letter O, because this is the one law issue. Click there, and then you can open up, of course, this article, which we have been examining. And the article title is Approaching One Law Controversies, Sorting Through the Legalism. Okay, so next time on Monday, we'll get into this whole subject of proselytos and whether it means a formal proselyte to Judaism or it's affected by earlier Greek usage, which just meant basically a sojourner. And that's something which I've certainly known about for a while, but not everyone is aware of. And just to remind you all, and I think that some people are not aware of this, but it needs to be stressed from time to time. Apologetics doesn't just deal with matters of theology and matters of defending the faith. We also have to deal with matters of spirituality and, how this affects people's lives. So while I have been seen to be in disagreement with one law, one Torah theology, particularly as it approaches the different passages which use one law or one statute, I believe that is restricted to the specific instruction. I've also been critical of the spirituality promoted by a great deal of the one law or one Torah sub-movement. And we're definitely going to be getting into that next week. A lot of people who come into the Messianic sphere of influence and they're influenced by one law or one Torah theology. Yes, one of the reasons they are later seen to have issues with it can be because of exegesis, interpreting various passages. But a lot of it does pertain to some of the bad attitudes, the legalism, the judgmentalism, the self-righteousness of many of its leaders who, in some cases, don't seem to care that much about people who lob onto their teachings in their pursuit of wanting to obey God, but then go and condemn other people for not doing what they're doing or look down on other people for not doing what they're doing. And they are certainly not tempered by a lot of the love, grace, mercy, forbearance, and patience, which is required of spiritually regenerated Messiah followers. So we're going to be getting into a lot of that next week. The study is cumulative, but yes, you can go and read the article Approaching One Law Controversies, and you can definitely see some of the things we'll be going through. But I definitely have commentary to interject because while in my Messianic days, especially when I was before going to seminary and learning some definite interpretational skills, I was affected by one law theology, absolutely. And I admit that I made mistakes and I went a little too far in some areas, but as I grew in not only my interpretational skills, but also my own spirituality, I was able to make adjustments where necessary. And that adjustment was not, I'm going to go back to church, okay? Because some people think that's the main adjustment. No, I'm part of the Messianic community. I remember Shabbat, the appointed times. I eat a kosher style of diet, but my faith does not rise or fall on those areas. The most important thing to me is the completed work of Yeshua on the tree of sacrifice. And I don't know for a lot of one law, one Torah people if the most important thing to them is Yeshua. I think for a lot of them, and I might be wrong, but I think for a lot of them, the most important thing is the law, the Torah, the Pentateuch. I think that is the God that many of the one law people serve. He will be the judge of them. All right, so let's move on now to our news roundup. We do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news roundup is time sensitive. News is time sensitive. It changes from day to day. When people go and they watch or listen to this episode in the future from the archives, they're going to listen to it because we discussed the Gare, not we went into some news regarding what's taking place in Iran right now, what's taking place in the Middle East, Israel, and some of the other news stories. But we got some really exciting news stories today. We don't have as much as we did yesterday, thankfully, but we do have some really good news stories today. Number one, please be praying for peace. Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, Iran. Things appear to be heading towards some kind of a point event. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia, Ukraine. And number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front, here in the Western Hemisphere. It's very, very important. Okay, now let's get into the news. All the news stories I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. So you can read the articles in their entirety, watch the different news clips, etc. All right, our first story. This is from Open Source Intel. Yesterday, 2:08. So this would have been when we were live yesterday. U.S. President Donald Trump has publicly raised the possibility of toppling Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, a longtime U.S. adversary, suggesting last week that it would be the best thing that could happen if Iran ends up with new leaders. And they open source references the Washington Post. So as we evaluate what is taking place right now with the U.S. military buildup in the region, we've got right now about a third of our active Navy in the area. That is something, it'll be the best thing for Iran if he leaves. That is something which is in the mind of the president right now. Now, how could that come about? Is it going to come about by diplomatic negotiations? Okay, we've given you enough time. We don't agree, but hey, if you want to leave the country and voluntarily leave, that's an option on the table. Is it going to be by some kind of bombing campaign? Is it going to be by special forces? I mean, these are the things which the president has at his disposal, and he's doubtlessly consulted with the Israeli government about other regional partners. Try to remember that. But only the U.S. government knows for certain when, if, all of this. But it's safe to say that tension is building. We're reaching some kind of a point. All right. Our next story. This is also open source. Oh, that was the story. I'm sorry. Visegrad 24. This is from yesterday morning. But this came across my feed after yesterday live stream, 10:37 a.m. And there's a 29-second clip. 5 countries have agreed to send troops to the International Stabilization Forces in Gaza: Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, and Albania. And there's a clip of the president of Indonesia right there. Now, one of the things some of you all may remember going back to September, was it, when the president of Indonesia addressed the UN General Assembly, and he does represent the world's largest Muslim country. It is Indonesia, which is kind of interesting. It's an Asian country. He was before the UN speaking in fluent English, talking about, yes, he believed in, peace for Gaza, peace for the Palestinians, but also peace for Israel. And he concluded his presentation by saying shalom. So, I don't know all of the specific nuances of, Middle Eastern Islam versus, Indonesian Islam, but many people are agreed that Indonesia generally wants peace. They want everybody to get along. They're far more moderate than some of the more Arab Middle Eastern partners. But we'll wait and see. Of course, if we believe the scriptures, there's going to be a period of peace of some kind. How genuine is it going to be? how is that going to actually manifest? But it'll be for a season, not it won't be a permanent peace by any means. From the New York Post, of course, people all trying to sort through what took place yesterday with the arrest of former Prince Andrew. President Trump expressed sympathy for the royal family, and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor on Thursday, the disgraced former prince, was arrested over his ties to billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, and we all know that Mary Trump, President Trump's mother, who was from Scotland, she had great admiration for the royal family. Now, one of the things which makes this very, I think, shocking to particularly people in the United Kingdom, but people across the world, and yes, even people in the United States, when we look at our own history as once being part of the old British Empire. This is an institution, the British royal family, which has lasted for over 1,200 years. And is it coming to a conclusion? And it's not so much is it coming to a conclusion, because it's reached some low points throughout a great deal of history. Calls for the abolition of the monarchy, calls for a republic, certainly in that small r republic. Certainly throughout the British Commonwealth, even Australia had a republic referendum in 1999. And I think the only reason it didn't pass is because the Republicans, small r Republicans, didn't agree upon what the alternative to the monarchy would be. But this is a huge scandal. This is disastrous. And what does it signal? Not just for the royal family, the British monarchy, but for a lot of other political institutions across the world. This Epstein thing is going to get. I don't think we have seen. I think we've just started to see the beginning of the Epstein mess, not the end of it. Okay, so our next story, and this is about President Trump from Newsmax yesterday, 19 February. Trump, Board of Peace will make United Nations run properly. President Donald Trump on Thursday said his Board of Peace not only will work with the United Nations on Gaza's future, the board will make sure the international organization runs properly. You can read some of the other comments here. Now, there are people, of course, they're speculating that this Board of Peace being established by President Trump is going to serve as an alternate to the United Nations. But the United Nations, of course, goes back to the end of the Second World War. Most countries on Earth at this point are members of the UN. This Board of Peace is much more eclectic at the moment. Is it going to be an alternative to the UN? Or is President Trump's intention that, look, the UN has tried and failed so many times. We're going to try to set up something else which can get, these specific jobs of what to do in Gaza done. And, it seems, at least as of yesterday, the Board of Peace is going to work parallel to the UN. Could the Board of Peace develop into something which ends up being the final world power? I mean, that's what a lot of the prophecy people will be talking about. I think it's premature, but I don't think it is something we need to ignore. From the Epic Times, this is yesterday, the 19th of February, the headline, Trump says next 10 days could decide fate of Iran talks. Noting the June U.S. strikes on Iran, President Donald Trump said, we may have to take it a step further if Iran does not agree to a deal. So this is from yesterday. We're now at 9 days. We're reaching a critical moment when it comes to the situation in Iran. Right now, this is where I say, the news changes from day to day. We always have to preface our news roundup with that. Some people doesn't always register with them. But yesterday, based on the information I was coming across my path, I thought that the Gerald R. Ford strike group was a lot closer to the Eastern Mediterranean than it actually is. And it's still in the Mediterranean now, but it's not in the theater of combat. So I would not expect, although this is my opinion, I could be completely wrong, I would not expect any dramatic activity over the weekend, but I would expect more, firm words out of the president, from the White House, from the administration, like this: we want Iran to cut a deal, but it might not happen. All right, here's a story which is definitely getting a lot of play on social media. This is more the American home front, but it definitely affects us all in the world. 42-second clip from Fox News. This is from 2:31 yesterday. Peter Doocy: Barack Obama said that aliens are real. Have you seen any evidence of non-human visitors to Earth? Trump: well, he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. And then Peter Doocy: so are aliens real? Trump: well, I don't know if they're real or not. I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. He made a big mistake. He took it out of classified information. Okay, although when you look at what former President Obama said, nothing's likely going to happen because of the fact that what he said, many people have been speculating about for decades, that perhaps there are, because of the vastness of the universe, there are other civilizations out there, but the distance between planet Earth and them is just so great, and it would take them eons perhaps to reach our planet. It's just not very likely. But of course, we got more about this story because of the president's post on Truth Social. So this is not the end of the whole extraterrestrial issue. From 2CTV yesterday, this is 3:46 p.m. and 1 minute 47-second clip. The Islamic Republic of Iran's state media has released footage of its joint naval exercise with Russia conducted in the Indian Ocean after Tehran temporarily moved to restrict the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz is that narrow piece which all ships have to transverse, entering in and out of the Persian Gulf. 1/5 of all the world's oil and gas supply goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is what's interesting here, okay? So Iran conducted naval exercises with Russia. 2C, but Moscow has repeatedly made clear it will not intervene in a direct conflict, and Beijing has already scaled back financial backing. That's what we really need to keep in mind here. Even though it may seem that, Russia and China have Iran's back, they really don't. Both Russia and China treat Iran, as the Islamic Republic, as a vassal. And even though they're willing to send them some token military equipment, some token economic aid, it's really, especially for China, we want your oil, we want your gas, we need it. And we're going to pay, only 30% or so what it's actually worth. And we're not even going to give you capital. We're only going to give you access to Chinese goods. So that's something to keep in mind, because if we see a major military conflict combined with an uprising of the Iranian people against the Islamic Republic, just expect Russia and China to pull away, because that's what they did in Venezuela, right? And that's something which, of course, the President Trump has to keep in mind. He's got to keep these other geopolitical elements in mind, why it's taken the time it has for this situation to develop, because back in January, people were wondering, why don't we just go in and, bomb the crap out of them? Well, while Israel is, of course, concerned about the Middle East, the region, and justifiably so, the United States has to be concerned about the region and the world, and how this is going to affect so many other things. But do not expect Russia or China to back up Iran in the case that the Iranian Republic goes down. Okay, now with that, here's an article from the Jerusalem Post. the headline, Netanyahu, Israel prepared for any scenario, working closely with U.S. amid Iran threat. And the byline, the Middle East is at a crossroads. The extremist elements refuse to give up and are reorganizing to challenge us again, he said. So this is a useful article you can read through, and talks about we are not resting on our laurels. We are prepared for any challenge and are working closely with the United States. And then a little further on, one thing is certain: if the Ayatollah regime makes a mistake and attacks us, they will experience a response they cannot even imagine. And yeah, there's a lot more talked about. And I will have to interject this because I look at social media. I do my best to screen the different news stories we post. I had a conversation with my mother about this yesterday. I remember around 6 years ago, right? 5, 6 years ago, when COVID started and there were all these lockdowns. And this is when we were doing the Outreach Israel report. And, some of us had to relearn some lessons, which we had to learn at the turn of the millennium in terms of the end times, what was going on, what was not going on. And yeah, we said some things like, they are doing this, they are doing that. Well, who are they, right? And yeah, there were some thoughts which came from media which I would not trust or put a lot of stock into at the present time. But it was a learning curve, 5 and 6 years ago. So when it came time to do Messianic Insider in this format last year, first we did like once a week, and there was a really long news roundup, and we actually did it before the theology roundup. And then at Passover, we flipped around and said, hey, we're going to go 5 times a week. We'll do theology, and then we'll do news. One of the important features of this is we actually go into specific news stories. Now, we get a lot of news off of X, formerly Twitter, from sources like Open Source Intel Defender, but we also use, more mainstream, Fox, New York Post. It just depends on what it is, Jerusalem Post. And I think that that's very important because we're not just getting news from, well, they are saying this or they are saying that. Part of the learning curve is that there really is so much out there in just open source material. You don't have to go into the fringe yet, especially because a resource like X, again, formerly Twitter, is an open port now. Ever since Elon Musk took it over, there are things which come across your feed, and people talk, people post things. They're rumors. We do know that if Israel's back is against the wall in a potential conflict, that the Israeli government will consider using non-conventional weapons. Okay, and we know Israel has atomic weapons, unlike Iran. So yeah, there are people who have speculated that if it gets really bad, Israel could deploy some of those things. That's the conflict which that's an option, of course, which has been on the table going back to the 1967 war. So that's not just speculation. That is part of their military doctrine. So to have the United States in the region, and if there is a conflict, getting pulled into do this, do that, is very important because Israel has limited military. They got an excellent military equipment, but the United States has the numbers. And as you recall from the 12-day war last June, Israel could send in the IAF. They could bomb particular sites, but it could only go so far. That's why Operation Midnight Hammer, the B-2 with the bunker busters, came in and took out various facilities, and they were conventional weapons. We don't want to see any potential future conflict go beyond conventional weapons, because when the N word is thrown around, nuclear, and I don't believe whatever we could see in the coming weeks, if something happens, I don't think it'll go that far. But how many people especially the adversaries of the United States, Russia and China, they always like to point out the United States is the only country which has ever deployed nuclear assets, right? Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I can assure you, and this is why you really need to be praying hard, that if in the event Israel thought it necessary to use some of their materials from that arsenal, you don't want, there's now two countries who've ever, United States and Israel, because that would be the cause of just exponential anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the world, especially if they deployed more than, just two devices. So keep that in mind. That's the kind of talk you see, particularly from the fringe right and the fringe left. If the potential conflict with Iran gets out of hand, would Israel feel the need to use some of its own nuclear arsenal? Because the United States, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was 80 years ago, right? In the Second World War, 81 years ago now. You don't want a country like Israel, which in the Holy Scriptures the world is going to come against, to be on that same list of, well, the U.S. has used nuclear weapons against another country, and Israel has used nuclear weapons against another country. That's why you got to pray that this would be decisive and it would all stay as conventional as possible. So, yeah, I know some of y'all don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that either. But that's part of the difficulty of the conflict we see possibly emerging in the coming weeks. Okay. All right. So from the New York Post, here's more on the royal family. Ex-Prince Andrew is still in line for the throne. UK must act fast to avoid disaster for the royal family, sources. And here's, of course, something you can just read through. Of course, this is the picture of Andrew in the after he was arrested on the way to the police station. Yeah, this is a real disaster for the royal family. And I know that, of course, here it talks about how King Charles is the monarch for 15 countries known as the Commonwealth realms, including Canada, Australia, and Jamaica, which has already been making moves to break free. Now, if this whole Epstein file thing, this is me also speculating, if it stays limited to Andrew, right, then while the monarchy will have to clean up a major mess, for a lot of us millennials, the most recent mess that they had to clean up was how they responded to the death of Princess Diana. Some of you have seen the film The Crown, with Helen Mirren as Queen Elizabeth, and they managed to fix the issue, and it had to do with an older generation of royal family members not being that relevant to the general population, which wanted to see them actually express a degree of a degree of mourning, and they didn't do that because that's just not how they were raised in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And so then later, when the Queen Mother passed away in 2002, they were a lot more open about it and everything. But this is the thing with Andrew. It is at the level of, or exceeds that of, Edward VIII and his abdication. If the issue of Epstein stays constrained to former Prince Andrew, then the royal family would probably be able to clean the mess up. If something goes all the way and gets connected to King Charles, and I know everyone has had this speculation in mind. Of course, we talk about this because of Antichrist in a Cup of Tea, the book by Tim Cohen, which claimed that Prince Charles of Wales was the anti-Messiah, which he, of course, is not. But if something goes all the way to the very top and King Charles is involved in something, then, and I mean, can you imagine seeing the sitting monarch of the United Kingdom, the oldest monarchy in human history, 1,200 years, arrested just like his brother? I mean, that would, of course, and I know everyone has guessed this, that would result in his abdication for certain. In terms of those Commonwealth realms and territories out there, some of you all may remember that following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, of course, a lot of us who followed it saw how Charles III was declared the new king in London, the court of St. James. But other Commonwealth realms had to similarly go through a process of declaring him king of Canada, Australia. I specifically watched that because the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is a Republican. They went through the motions of declaring him king. So if the current monarch ever had to abdicate, I suspect that the United Kingdom would then declare the Prince of Wales, Prince William, King William V. But some of these other countries might decide, look, we are not declaring the successor of King Charles our new head of state. We are giving that authority to our present Governor General, who will then oversee the transition of our Commonwealth realm into a republic. That is something I would see. And of course, it would start out by countries, especially countries in the Caribbean, where there's already Republican movements like Jamaica, and it's all tied into the slave trade and everything else too, and wanting to brush off old colonialism. But even in an Australia or in New Zealand or Canada, you could see that. So this is just the kind of speculation people have, and keep these things in mind. But this kind of corruption is not limited to royalty, aristocracy by any means. But at least in a republic, where you just have to have somebody resign their position and then someone replace them, this, if the scandal with Andrew gets any bigger, you could see the United Kingdom become something else in the not too distant future. And look, I'm of British ancestry, Scottish, English. Yeah, I loved the Queen. I know many of you all did as well. But what kind of a world do we live in? A world corrupted by sin and evil. Okay. From the White House, this was posted at 7:16 p.m. I actually saw it first on open source intel, but I had to go to the White House to confirm it. This is from the president. Based on the tremendous interest shown, we already talked about this from President Trump being quoted about Obama, I will be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, and unidentified flying objects, UFOs. So, okay, at the start of the new Trump term, so rewind to last year, last January, last February, we knew that the president was going to start this new president, Trump, in his second term, is going to start declassifying a lot of information, whether that information was the JFK assassination, RFK assassination, MLK assassination. And then, of course, later things like we've heard talk about Amelia Earhart. We've heard talk about now, of course, the Epstein files. What is that all going to do? And it's eventually going to lead to things like Area 51, UFOs, UAPs, etc. Now, it takes a long time for people to sort through all of this information. Simply because it gets declassified doesn't mean we start hearing things about it within days. Yes, there are people who are doing searches and they're coming out with snippets here, snippets there. But in terms of actual history, it takes a long time for people to sort through all this information. But now, I mean, this is the hot stuff. This is the spicy stuff. UFOs. And of course, a lot of people for many years have talked about, when are we finally going to have disclosure on this? And we do have one story, My Charisma, later on, which has referenced this. Okay, so some of you all know the problem, especially since Charlie Kirk's assassination, that there's been a vacuum of people wanting to fill his place. The two most prominent people who've been trying to fill that vacuum left by Charlie Kirk have been Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, who are not fans of Israel, not huge fans of the Jewish people. Another big one, of course, has been Nick Fuentes. So I saw this clip come across social media. I know some of you all, well, he's probably an anti-Semite and he doesn't like this or he doesn't like that. Here's a clip, Right Wing Watch, from yesterday. You need to be aware of it. There's 49 seconds. Nick Fuentes says, and yes, I watched this twice to confirm this. Nick Fuentes says that women are made to be effed. Okay, that's the F word. Women are either mothers, whores, or nuns. No other option. There are no female philosophers. There are no female inventors. There are no female generals or billionaires. They are mothers, whores, nuns. End of list. That's what you can be. Well, historically, that is completely not true. There have been female philosophers. There are definitely female inventors. Definitely females. I mean, just Marie Curie alone, right? There are no female generals or billionaires. Yes, there are generals in the U.S. military who are female. There are definitely females who are billionaires, and not just those who inherited wealth. But Nick Fuentes is a male chauvinist. And what does he believe women are good for? He believes women are good for their uterus, basically. And they're just there to help men reproduce. Now, I'll be honest. In my Messianic experience, and especially when I've interacted with some people on the one law, one Torah side, definitely Hebrew root side, there's some people on that side, they wouldn't be as crass as Nick Fuentes, but yeah, they believe that women are the inferiors of men and that they're basically there to have children and keep house, that we shouldn't be helping women develop their mental skills. Women shouldn't be educated the same as men are, for example. I've had problems with one law, one Torah people, some of them, over this issue. You know, my two sisters, Jane and Maggie, just like me, they both went to college and they both got master's degrees. And my sister Maggie is a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy now. And so we've had tensions with some one law people over those kinds of things. Whereas, anyway, not saying that they would agree with the style of how Nick Fuentes does matters. Messianic Judaism, while it is broad and diverse, it generally favors, women getting an education, women going to college, women doing things. It's a little more complementarian than I would be, of course, but it does. You don't see women going to school as something looked down upon. And you don't see it emphasized at all that women are just there to basically reproduce and keep house. All right, here's an important post I thought I'd pass along from Nio Berg. This was posted 8:34 a.m. yesterday, but I didn't see it until later. This is an account inside Iran, so take this for what it's worth, but this is important. Yes, and that's a picture of Tony Soprano there. So Nio Berg says, and he represents a rapidly growing majority. He is also entirely right. The USA has nothing to fear. Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria. Right, Iran is Persia. And so this person inside of Iraq says, dear American friends, I am an Iranian living in Iran, living in Tehran. I want to tell you that Iran is not like Afghanistan or Iraq. If your government attacks the Ayatollah regime, we will overthrow the regime from inside immediately. This war is not going to be long, and your tax money and the lives of your soldiers will not be at risk. Please do not oppose the war and let Iran finally be free. In the future, USA and Iran will be good friends. So, yeah, we do know that even though Iran is largely Islamic, Iran also has a huge ancient culture going back to Persia, going back to Zoroastrianism. It's been emphasized by the exiled crown prince that once Iran is free and this Islamic Republic is no more, the new Iran will sign the Cyrus Accords with the state of Israel, a recognition that the Iranian, the Persian people have always been friends of the Jewish people and were used to help them be freed from the tyranny of the Babylonians and return home. So we, of course, will see what happened, but this is something important to keep in mind in this ongoing conflict. From the Telegraph, this is Instagram, this headline, thank God the late Queen isn't here to witness monarchy's lowest moment. And here's some of the commentary. It is the lowest moment for the monarchy in almost 400 years. Yes. So the Queen's third child on his 66th birthday, no less, um, arrested. And not to speculate too much, I've already done enough of that today. Not difficult to recognize the British monarchy is an endangered species. Okay. Here's a sad story. Some of you all are already aware of it by now. Eric Dane, Grey's Anatomy and Euphoria star, although I frequently watch him, my mother and sister really like the show, The Lost or The Last Ship, The Lost Ship. Is that what it is? Passed away at 53, nearly 1 year after announcing ALS diagnosis. ALS is also commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Yes, this is really sad. Eric Dane, star of Grey's Anatomy and Euphoria, dead at 53. Now, this is really sad. Of course, our thoughts and our prayers are with his wife, 2 children, family members. But there's something else to keep in mind here from this. This is a prompt for me to, and this is really hard to talk about, but a very high level member of the MJA leadership this past fall was also diagnosed with ALS. And Eric Dane passed away within a year of being diagnosed. So when I talked about, and yes, it was someone who I mentioned in my discussion yesterday. When I was at the IMCS Rabbis Conference, and some of you all saw the theme of the conference, signs and wonders, and you're like, oh God, this is just going to be a charismatic, free for all, who knows? And yeah, there were some charismatic things that went on. I had to stress, look, not the title I would have chosen, but there are some people who are attending here. They need signs and wonders to manifest because they've got severe physical ailments. They've got some crisis going on in their lives, and they need divine intervention. So this is where you have to look at the bigger picture, and you have to say, look, not what I would have chosen, but there are people who need a sign from God for a divine healing. And yeah, this particular person who has been diagnosed with ALS is trying to find, the right treatment, needs a lot of prayer. You know, how long does he have? How long does he not have? There are a lot of people in the Messianic community, and we get caught up in a lot of theology. Oh, I disagree with them on this. I disagree with them on that. They're getting older, and as you get older, you have physical ailments which can get the better of you. When my father, Kimball McKee, my sister Maggie was born on March the 31st, 1992. Several days earlier, he had a procedure done to take a mole off of his back, which had gotten really big. And I remember specifically what the surgeon said: I'm going to have a radical incision. And then several days later, after Maggie was born, they had it tested for cancer. It came back positive, malignant melanoma. Later, we're at not the dermatologist, but we're at the oncologist, sorry, and he's telling us all there he's got between 6 months to 2 years. Well, actually, the melanoma got my father in 5 months. So, we don't talk a lot about, some of the physical challenges of some of the Messianic leaders out there because we do want to respect their privacy. But at the same time, there are some leaders out there, one in particular, who has been diagnosed with ALS. His loss would definitely be felt by the Messianic Jewish community here in North America. And yeah, one of the reasons I believe that our family has assigned us to the Messianic community is to, in the event that some of these leaders start passing away, because a lot of them are in their mid to late 70s, mid to late 80s. We got rabbis, we got Messianic Jewish rabbis who are in their mid 80s, is to help fill the vacuum by having a consistent service like 5 times a week with Messianic Insider, especially as we evaluate the unknowns of the future, and what could happen. Okay, I'm going to try to accelerate this a little bit. We still have a lot of stories to go through. Okay, this is from This is from Nora L on X. And yes, she references some of the things about Donald Trump and extraterrestrials, but I wanted to focus on her commentary here. Laura Trump reveals Trump has a speech prepared to announce alien contact with Earth. Okay, who knows about that? That's all guesstimation. That's all speculation. But here the commentary is rapture cover up? Question mark. Wouldn't this Iran situation just be the perfect setup for the quote unquote aliens to quote unquote intervene in the name of quote unquote peace? Anything is possible at this point. Looking up for Jesus! Exclamation mark. Okay, so I wanted to reference that not because of, I mean, I don't know if the president has a speech prepared or not. I would assume that he doesn't. But there are going to be people who, in talking about this alien thing, Christian people who they're going to use this as a cover for the pre-trib rapture. That's what I want you all to be aware of. So expect that kind of talk, in addition to the Genesis 6 Nephilim talk. Okay, here's more on the whole extraterrestrial front. This is from Jesse Waters on X, 41-second clip, and he's interviewing John Fetterman, who is actually been a lot more surprising than I would have thought him to be. Breaking. Trump has just ordered the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, to release the alien files. Senator John Fetterman says the odds are pretty high that aliens are out there. I think life probably exists somewhere. Now, Senator Fetterman, he represents the opinion of a lot of people for a long time. And that would be that I don't know where he stands in terms of matters of faith. I'm sure he believes in God, though. But basically, the universe is so vast, it's so ancient. There's got to be something going on among these trillions of planets somewhere, someplace else. But the distance between planet Earth in the Milky Way galaxy and civilization XYZ and galaxy ABC, whatever it is, we're just probably never going to able to have some kind of first contact. That's what his basic position is, and I think is the position of a lot of people. And even since there are a lot of sincere evangelical believers who if God's got something else going on, if it's on the other side of the universe and we're not going to find out until the Lord returns or we enter into eternity. That's basically their position. And okay. Okay, we actually have 9 more stories, but I'll try to accelerate this. Open source intel this morning, 6:37, Iran's foreign minister signaled that a 3 to 5 year pause in uranium enrichment could be considered as part of a potential deal with the U.S. He suggests that the U.S. is considering this, and open source's conclusion is take what he says with caution. At this point, right now, I don't consider a lot of what the Islamic Republic says as being sincere or genuine. They're just trying to buy time. I might be wrong, but I think they're just trying to buy time. Okay. Excuse me. From the New York Post. And this was published today at 9:37 a.m. USS Gerald R. Ford enters Mediterranean Sea as Iran tensions rise. So yesterday, you can read some of this more. They've already passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, heading toward the Middle East. I believed, or I thought yesterday, based on what I was seeing, was already in the Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, we're not going to have all the information, and we shouldn't either. But the Gerald R. Ford probably is going to be off the coast of Israel. The Abraham Lincoln is going to be much closer to a potential Iranian theater of combat. But what other country on earth has as many super carriers as the United States? I mean, so pray for our soldiers and sailors. Okay, here's a story which hit this morning. We don't tend to focus on economic matters that much, but if it's big, I will mention it. Okay, open source intel defender. This was posted 9:41. This is the first one I saw. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision led by Chief Justice John Roberts, has ruled that the sweeping tariffs imposed last year by President Donald J. Trump under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, targeting dozens of countries across the world, were unlawful. Okay. And now many of us, especially those who follow the markets, whatever that means to you, we're watching to see what's going to be next in terms of the Donald Trump tariffs. Many in the administration are probably expecting this, so they've got some other plan for their America First tariff agenda. We'll see what happens. I am much more interested in how the Trump tariffs affect the geopolitical situation. I'm not so much, in terms of Messianic Insider at least, affected by how they cause us to pay a little more on this item, a little less on that item. I mean, yes, I want us to all be able to have reasonably priced gasoline, groceries, etc. But we only focus on the macro aspect of this. How could this affect various other geopolitical elements? So we'll see what happens in the coming week or so. Okay, a lot of you all probably seen this circulate around social media. This is 21 seconds. Breaking footage of Tucker Carlson in the Ben Gurion airport in Israel has been released. See below. He wasn't detained and merely went through routine processing. Here you see him smiling and hugging airport staff in a VIP lounge, contradicting his account. And this is from Ed Krasenstein. Or Krasenstein. So there was a report that, Tucker Carlson has been detained at Ben Gurion airport. And well, guess what? Pretty much everyone who goes through Ben Gurion Airport, especially now, is going to be pulled off to the side, interviewed. Why are you here in Israel? What are you planning to do here? That's standard procedure. But this video that's come out, he's friendly. He's trying to do this. Like how? And people are definitely extrapolating that Tucker Carlson is hypocritical and maybe even a fraud. Hey, a lot of people have opinions, and we'll see what some of the other opinions are, or we'll likely see in the coming days. From My Charisma, they do not disappoint. So here, from today, the 20th of February, Trump moves to release alien files. L.A. Marzulli warns the Great Deception has begun. And you can skim through this. Some of this doesn't mention the Nephilim here. It does not. But instead, it tries to associate UFOs and aliens with great deception. And yes, I would say for my own self that UFOs and aliens are probably part of some great deception. Now, in terms of specifics, and this is where I differ from a lot of people in terms of operational procedure. I do believe that in terms of, just being able to speak on this whole subject, we have to wait for some more information to be released. While I do believe that all of us are probably going to come to the conclusion that there's some element of Genesis 6 Nephilim return, trying to get people to believe that human civilization is not unique, and that if life could evolve on other planets independent of a supreme being, it can evolve here. I think those are some of the common elements we look for in UFO alien deception. But in terms of being able to say, okay, what about this and what about that? We wait information, because even when the apostles would have gone out in the Mediterranean, they knew enough about the different ethnic groups, civilizations, certainly Greece and Rome, to be able to rightly subvert the contemporary philosophy and the ancient deception. And so for me, at least in apologetics, I'm not talking about, your average layperson out there. It's going to be important to know what information is being released about possible, I should say, hypothetical alien civilization, MNO, or alien civilization DEF. we've already used A, B, C, and X, Y, Z today, but you all get the idea. And who are these beings? What planet do they come from? What's their history? Because I think a big part of a possible alien deception is going to be, these civilizations are so much more advanced and more involved than we are. Are they? What are some of their philosophies? What are some of their teachings? Does what they're saying actually make sense, or do we already have the answer here on Earth? So we, of course, continue to monitor this, and we'll see what happens. But you're going to see me approach this a little differently because of the apologetic angle. Okay, they're claiming to be some civilization from, a distant part of this galaxy, a distant part of the universe. What do they stand for? What is their history? What is their philosophy? Do they have a religion? Are they spiritual of some kind? And how does it match up against what we believe or what we have believed? And maybe our beliefs have the edge, and this is genuinely deception, and we can point out it's deception. We're not just saying, well, they're demons, disguising themselves as aliens. No, this is deception, and this is why it's deception, because they're claiming this about existence. We have a much better answer. Okay, 4 more stories. From 2C TV, 51 seconds. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has issued a blunt message following intelligence assessments that a potential preemptive strike from the Islamic Republic of Iran is becoming more likely. Excuse me. If the Ayatollah makes a mistake and attacks us, they will experience a response they cannot even imagine. Okay. Now, as I said, and I did have to go into a little bit of detail for you, we know that, yes, the United States is the world's second largest nuclear power, but Israel itself has nuclear weapons. We do not want to see a potential conflict. Iran and Israel, we don't want to see nuclear weapons used, because if past is prologue, we remember what took place, the Gaza conflict, the conflict with Hamas. No one was prepared, and we're still sorting through the exponential rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And that's just with, terrorists. That's just with Israel bombing terrorist tunnels, trying to take out Hamas. The argument that Israel was committing genocide. Look, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they would carpet bomb Gaza, and they would eliminate far, far many more civilians than actually perished. But can you imagine what would happen in terms of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism if Israel used the bomb? Okay? Can you imagine what would happen? I mean, it's been estimated that 10% or so over the past few years of evangelical support for Israel has dropped. Yeah, pray that this is a decisive, quick conflict if it happens, and that it can stay entirely conventional. From Open Source Intel Defender this morning, 10:21 a.m., speaking to NBC News, a senior official with the Trump administration stated regarding ongoing negotiations with Iran, "We told the Iranians we're not going to wait another few years like the Obama administration." Okay, that's not a surprise. The buildup of U.S. military forces in the region, they're not there on some pleasure cruise. They're not there to for the nice weather, the warm weather, the nice scenery. They're there to do business should the commander-in-chief say they're to do business. Okay, another post on this from Open Source Intel Defender, and this is 20 seconds. Reporter: "Mr. President, are you considering a limited military strike to pressure Iran into a deal?" President Trump: "I guess I can say I'm considering it." Yeah, all options are on the table. There's a 20-second clip there. We don't know what's going to happen. The president wants maximum flexibility, from diplomacy to a decisive military strike, and then probably some limited or combination of things, whether it's commandos, whether it's, limited strikes here. We don't know, and we're not supposed to know. But we are supposed to be ready, monitoring events in the event that we see a conflict in the coming days, And people in our Messianic community, they haven't been prepared by some of their leaders to, are you praying for Iran? Are you praying for Israel? And not just praying for Iran or Israel generally. Okay, we pray for, my local congregation prays for Israel every week. But do we actually pray for, we got the Islamic Republic. It's in a crisis mode. Everyone can recognize that. And many of the people of Iran, they want to see this current government gone. The U.S. favors regime change. Israel certainly favors regime change. How is that going to affect the Messianic community? How's that going to affect the believers in the region? Far too many Messianic assemblies are not even at that basic level, much less what are we going to do when we wake up? And, we kind of had a test run with Maduro at the beginning of the year. I woke up Saturday morning. I missed the U.S. Venezuelan war, which lasted from 2:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the morning, right? It happened when I was all asleep. And then recently, just yesterday, a lot of us woke up. Prince Andrew's been arrested. How much of this is just preparation for a possible conflict with Iran? All right, and here's an important story. This is from my charisma, but this is very important to me personally, and because it affects the faith community in which I was originally raised. This is from my charisma. After United Methodist split, conservative denomination rapidly expands around the world. And this is an article about the Global Methodist Church, which broke off from the United Methodist Church in 2021, 2022. And it mainly goes into how the Global Methodist Church, I mean, it's evangelical, left the UMC because of the UMC's progressive left-leaning acceptance of LGBTQ ideologies. And most of the people I grew up with in the United Methodist Church, the Kentucky Conference, which was evangelical, they've all gone with the Global Methodist Church. Likewise, Asbury Seminary, it's gone with the Global Methodist Church. And yes, it got to the point where the main office of the United Methodist Church, especially in North America, is just too liberal, too progressive. Now, when they'd have a lot of their, big giant general conferences, the conservatives in North America, kept the discipline of the United Methodist Church conservative because of the votes from a lot of the African and Indian churches, right? So the evangelicals in the United Methodist Church in North America, the United States, were kept spiritually on a spiritual life support because of the Africans and the Indians voting with them. Well, you can't continue indefinitely like that. So in 2021, 2022, the Global Methodists broke off. They're evangelical, they're conservative. If God had not called my father home in 1992 and we hadn't entered into the Messianic community 1995, 1996, we would be part of the Global Methodist Church. And there are some things that the Global Methodist Church represents that I still adhere to and that I don't agree with the Messianic community about. But I'm here. This is where God has assigned me to be in the Messianic community till the Lord returns. Because even though I'm very appreciative of the Global Methodist Church, and it means that the Wesleyan tradition can continue to have an influence on American religion, I can tell you that while they're solid in terms of opposing LGBTQ plus, there are people in the Global Methodist. They support Israel. They support the Jewish people. They know Christians are connected to Israel in some way. And so they probably would hold to a quasi bilateral ecclesiology. But there are also people who are replacement theology. And in the Global Methodist Church today, about as far as you could get, and this is true, by the way, with a lot of mainline Protestant groups, about as far as you could get in terms of the Messianic movement, and I'm sorry to say this, would be, Lord, we pray for peace, Israel and Palestine. That's about as far as you would be able to get. That's as far as I was able to really get when I was in seminary. And I was around a lot of conservative evangelicals. So, but I know some people wonder, John Scott Methodist heritage. I mean, aren't they liberal? Well, Here's a good article for you to look through so you can know that the evangelicals did break off. And if a God had not called our family, assigned us to the Messianic community, we would have gone with that split too. All right. Wasn't expecting to go as long today with the news roundup, but I do think I needed to give you some background, some information regarding a number of these situations. So when we say pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, remember, yes, only true peace can be enacted by the Prince of Peace, Sar Shalom, Yeshua, the Messiah himself. But we don't want to see any potential conflict with Iran go beyond conventional weapons, especially as it involves Israel, because Israel doesn't need to have its, well, America did Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Israel, we don't want to see that happen. That would, the only other thing which would jumpstart anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in such a way would be animal sacrifices on the Temple Mount. A lot of us already know that. We don't want to see Israel join that list, the Hiroshima, Nagasaki list. We don't. So pray for peace right now. Pray that if there is a conflict in the coming weeks, it'll be quick, it'll be decisive, and it will stay conventional. Okay. All right. On behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. It'll definitely help with growing behind the scenes expenses we have on this or that. If you have not already, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, and generally you can take a look at our ministry adventures from over the years. Please do give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It will definitely help our exposure on social media. We will see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.